Activist Radio is on the air. You have tuned into the Mark Harrington Show, sponsored by Created Equal. Mark is training a new generation of leaders to take on the culture of death and win.
You don't like abortion, don't have one.
The only thing that can be said to be objective truth is that there is no objective truth.
It does come out in one piece. It comes out in one piece.
I would argue that we certainly are not all created equal.
And now, here's Mark.
That's right. You're a radio activist here, coming to you live from the Created Equal studios here in Columbus, Ohio, with the Mark Harrington Show, your voice of resistance, coming to you live on Facebook and other media platforms, social media platforms, every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can catch us live here on the internet, on Facebook and other media platforms. Folks, and if you've been watching the show, you know, we launched this thing in, what was it, March, I believe. We're gaining listeners and viewers. I ask you, if you like the show, share it. Let your friends know about it. 1 p.m. Eastern Time, live here on Facebook. And, of course, the video is archived as well. And so you can watch it afterwards on Facebook, or from that matter, the Created Equal YouTube page. So we try to bring you cutting edge stories, news from, what's happening in the culture war. Today is going to be no different. If you've been paying attention at any level, you know what happened in Washington, D.C. yesterday when a representative, a Republican Congressman Steve Scalise, who's the majority whip of the Senate, was shot along with, I think it's 5 others, at a baseball game, a practice for the annual congressional baseball game. And Steve Scalise, at this moment, as far as we know, last reports show him still in critical condition in the hospital there in Alexandria, Virginia. So we want to keep praying for Representative Scalise and this horrible act of violence that happened in Washington, D.C. yesterday. But today's show, here's what I want to talk about. A couple of questions. First of all, does free speech, does heated rhetoric, does the things that we've been hearing from the left ever since Donald Trump was elected president, does that lead to acts of violence? Does that lead to what we saw yesterday? Was this individual animated or motivated by what he heard from, the others that opposed Donald Trump, including Bernie Sanders? That's what we want to talk about. We also want to talk about the implications on conservative pro-life speech ongoing. What does that mean for us? Can we expect this to become some normal thing? Is this the new normal for us, that we might be facing these types of acts of violence and even assassination attempts? So that's what we're going to be talking about today on the Mark Harrington Show. The question I have for us, if you are a pro-life Christian, do you have one of these on your back now? Have we turned the page in America? Have we crossed over a line, a Rubicon, if you will, so that no longer do we have a civil society that can debate things in the public square, civilly without resorting to acts of violence? Have we passed over to the point now that this is acceptable and actually tolerated? And I would dare say, maybe we're at a point that this is even being encouraged by our political speech in America. So we want to talk about that today, and hopefully I can bring a little bit of insight into what's going on. So I've been talking about this for several months now, and we have experienced this at Created Equal, and that is ever since Donald Trump was elected president, we have seen a spike, an uptick in the types of threats that we've gotten. We've had acts of violence perpetrated against our own people, our young people on overpasses and on college campuses and things like that. Of course, we've all witnessed the types of anti-Trump protests around the country that have led to violence, whether it be on Berkeley campus or other places around the country. So this is a somewhat of a new thing. Now, of course, it was starting to happen with the Black Lives Matter thing years ago, and it just kind of built upon itself to this fever pitch. And then when Donald Trump got elected, it kind of broke loose. But we are seeing a disturbing trend culminating in yesterday's events. I mean, this is the first time, and I mean, I've been around a long time. It's the first time in my recollection that we've ever had an attempt for a mass political assassination. And that's what this was. This was an attempt to assassinate as many political enemies as this guy could in a short period of time. And if it weren't for the actions of the Capitol Police Department and the security that Representative Scalise had with him, if he wouldn't have had that kind of security detail, I submit to you, this would have been a bloodbath beyond anything we've ever seen. So I think this marks a point in our country and our politics where first time we've ever seen anything like this. We need to call it what it was, and that is an attempt at a mass assassination of a political foe. And so this is a very disturbing trend that we're seeing. We're also seeing just this idea that violence is an acceptable way to express your difference with somebody. It's no longer just being tolerated by the left. In many respects, it's being encouraged by the left. And of course, just what was it, a week or two ago, we saw a comedian, and I use that term advisedly, comedian Kathy Griffin pose next to the head of the decapitated head of Donald Trump. And thankfully, I mean, she was disgraced for that, but she was accused of encouraging violence against the sitting president. Of course, at the March for Women in Washington in January, we had Madonna, another role model for American youth, said that she had long dreamed about blowing up the White House. Now, can you imagine either one of those things happening from a conservative as it relates to Barack Obama? I mean, please, could you imagine the uproar that would happen in the mainstream media regarding those kinds of comments? From Hollywood, we continue to see this kind of rhetoric coming from individuals like Snoop Dogg. Again, what a great American, Snoop Dogg, who has produced a music video in which he talks about shooting Donald Trump in the head. This is not just tolerating violence against our political enemies. This is encouraging that. Again, we've had other examples. Marilyn Manson. I thought Marilyn Manson, by the way, was done. I didn't realize that guy was still trying to produce music. But apparently he has created a music video in which he kills Donald Trump. We see the play in the Shakespeare in the Park, the play Caesar, in which Donald Trump is assassinated in the play. So there are numerous examples in pop culture to which this kind of thing is encouraged, this kind of violence. Now they'll say, "Oh, it's just, this is just entertainment or whatever." But obviously, I don't think it is. I think the more you kind of see this thing, the more that people are encouraging it. We've seen it from our own government. We've seen Democrats and liberals call the president a Nazi, right? We've heard him called Hitler, Adolf Hitler. They've said recently in regard to the repeal and replace of Obamacare that it will kill women and children. Totally irresponsible comments. I mean, way outside the realm of what we should be doing and saying. And then you have this resist movement, of course, that took shape after the election of Donald Trump, culminating in all the violence in Berkeley and other places around the country. So this is, the new normal, unfortunately, of our political discourse. And it culminated yesterday in this act of violence against some members of Congress and their aides in Washington, D.C. Certainly, we're a polarized country. We have been for many, many years, but at least we used to know how to disagree without being disagreeable. We've probably passed over that now, unfortunately, with the election of Donald Trump. The bottom line is, folks, the world's on fire. I don't know if you've noticed, the world's on fire. And as my good friend, Coach Dave Daubenmire says, the culture is disintegrating, right? I believe that. The whole idea of a civil society is breaking down right before our eyes. And I'm asking the question, what can we as pro-life Christians, what can we do to kind of stem this thing from getting out of hand? That's what I want to talk about a little bit today. But before we do, let's turn our focus to what happened yesterday. This individual, apparently his name is James T. Hodgkinson. Hodgkinson is 66 or was 66 years old. If you go to his Facebook page, he was a political supporter of Bernie Sanders. He's a very strong, or was a very strong anti-Trump activist. He was mad about the election, apparently, very upset about it. He has a little bit of a history, that is run-ins with the law. He's been charged with domestic battery in the past. There were reports that he took his long rifle out into the woods and just fired it off, and was charged with aggravated discharge of a firearm. I mean, this guy's he's a bad actor. I mean, to begin with, right? I mean, he's a lawbreaker, or was, now that he's no longer with us. That's for certain. We know that about him. We're going to know a whole lot about him because now he's dead, right? He's not going to be able to tell a story. We're not going to know entirely what his motivations were. However, if you went to his Facebook page, it's very clear that he was upset with Donald Trump, with the election of Donald Trump. When he went to the baseball field where the folks, the congressmen, were practicing for this annual congressional baseball game, which, by the way, is a ministry. It's a donation. It's something they do for charity, which, by the way, is going to happen today. I'm glad that that's actually going to happen today, irrespective of this shooting. He went to the baseball field and asked if those out on the field were Republicans. So he clearly was singling people out. It reminded me of when Dylan Klebold and I think it was Eric Harris, right, in the shootings where was that? In Colorado, I think. I forget the name of the high school. Asked if people were Christians before they shot him. It's similar kind of thing here. He definitely singled out Republicans. There's no question about it. 5 wounded, 1 critically. Like I say, Representative Scalise is still in the hospital. And, obviously, when this kind of thing happens, unfortunately, you get the knee-jerk reactions on the right, and you get the knee-jerk reactions on the left. The knee-jerk reactions on the left are, they don't want to blame anything that the guy might have said. They don't want to blame any of the rhetoric that came from the left that might have encouraged or animated this guy to go do this stuff. That's predictable. It's also predictable that they often will immediately blame some kind of mental illness, although they have no reason to believe this man was mentally ill. There's no records of it that we're aware of. It may well be that he was, but the left often wants to automatically go to that. They just want to say, "Oh, he was disturbed. He was not right. He was messed up. He was a whack job. He was mentally ill," without any knowledge or understanding of whether they were or not. And they just write it off that the guy just was out of his mind. Well, clearly the guy wasn't right to not be able to handle the political changes in America to the point that we go shoot somebody. I mean, he needs some help there, but we automatically want to blame mental illness. I mean, this might have nothing to do with any kind of mental illness that this guy had, but that's where we want to go. We want to rush to judgment and just write it off as this guy was mentally ill. I think that does this whole thing a disservice and does us as Americans a disservice. There's something that led this guy to do what he did. And that's what we want to talk about. The other thing is gun control. I automatically talk about how we need to restrict guns. Interesting, Bernie Sanders is an anti-gun politician, yet this guy was a big supporter of Bernie, and he carried a long gun with him. I mean, apparently he was living in his van in Alexandria, Virginia for several months and had firearms in his van. So apparently he didn't believe that part of Bernie Sanders' platform. So we often want to rush to judgment. The left likes to blame mental illness and guns, and then the right, unfortunately, wants to blame the speech. Well, the left does that too, but wants to blame what this guy might have believed as political ideas and so forth. So I think what we need to do as pro-lifers, as Christians who claim the name of Jesus Christ, we need to kind of rise above all this. We don't want to stoop to the level of any of the extremes that we see in regard to this situation with the shooting in D.C. I am, for one, calling for people to take a deep breath, calm down a little bit. I mean, there's certainly some things we can glean from it. So some lessons learned, but we don't want to also rush to judgment. We don't also want to prejudge what's going on. And many conservatives immediately want to blame the rhetoric of the left. And again, I think it has some role in it, no question. But I think it's dangerous to begin to do that, because then we have to go down the road of, okay, what kind of speech can we embark on that would not lead to this kind of thing? And then we start wondering whether we should self-censor, that kind of thing. We shouldn't say what we believe because we're afraid some guy's going to go out there and do something crazy because of what we've said. So I think it's difficult to go that direction. The bottom line is Bernie Sanders is not responsible for this guy shooting Representative Steve Scalise. He's just not. You cannot draw a direct correlation to Bernie Sanders or any other political figure or Hollywood figure that we're aware of. I mean, there's nothing written down or anything on his Facebook page that said, I went and shot Representative Scalise because Bernie Sanders said so. I mean, that's the kind of thing now if there were some kind of direct correlation, obviously that's something we should be willing to discuss, but there is no direct correlation, right? We need to stop short of blaming a guy like Bernie Sanders, is as awful as he is on so many political issues, for the shooting in Washington, D.C. So having said that, speech has consequences. And as a public figure myself, I have to watch what I say so that people don't get the wrong impressions about what I say and go out and act upon them. And the same is true of any political leader. We need to be acting responsibly with speech. Now, I don't believe there should be any limits on speech except when it comes to what they call fighting words. You can't threaten somebody. Basically, there are three restrictions to speech that I think are fair and appropriate. The first is fighting words. We can't threaten somebody overtly, okay? And I will say that some of the things I just mentioned regarding some of these Hollywood figures, Snoop Dogg and Marilyn Manson and Madonna and Kathy Griffin, I mean, they come to the edge of fighting words. There's no question that they are trying to stretch it as far as they can go. But fighting words is something that should not be regarded as a protected speech. The second thing is you can't cause panic. In other words, the old saying is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. And you just can't incite panic with your words. And then the third, of course, is obscenity when it comes to speech. That is also restricted. So those are the three restrictions. Other than those, I mean, the First Amendment and free speech, we should have complete ability to say what we wish, as long as it doesn't violate any one of those three standards. Now, let's talk about the speech of the left for a moment, and particularly Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is probably one of the worst violators of this kind of thing. When it, not those three that I just mentioned, but the idea of saying things that are very provocative. He's a class warfare guy. He's a race baiter. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that man tries to pit Americans against each other, and he's a big time anti-Trump voice out there. So what I want to do, and this just shows you the kind of bigotry and intolerance that's coming from the left wing of our politics. This video that I'm about to show you, this was in a hearing, about a week and a half ago in Washington regarding the deputy director of the White House Management and Budget Office. They were hearing from this nominee. His name is Russell Vought. Russell Vought. And he was before the committee, and Bernie Sanders apparently sits on this committee. And if you just watch listen to the questions that Bernie Sanders asked this man, who's a professing Christian, unapologetic in his Christianity, in the belief in the gospel and the exclusivity of the Christian message. You'll see that. But just how Bernie Sanders treats him and views him gives you a picture into how the left sees those who disagree with them. So let's go ahead and play that clip if we could. This is Bernie Sanders again questioning Russell Vought, who was he was the nominee for the budget, the deputy director of the budget of Office of Management and Budget at the White House. Go ahead.
Do you believe that people in the Muslim religion stand condemned? Is that your view?
Again, Senator, I'm a Christian, and I wrote that piece.
Well, what does that say?
The statement of faith of Wheaton.
I understand that. I don't know how many Muslims there are in America. I really don't know. Probably a couple of million. Are you suggesting that all of those people stand condemned? What about Jews? They stand condemned too?
Senator, I'm a Christian.
I understand you are a Christian, but this country is made up of people who are not just. I understand that Christianity is the majority religion, but there are other people who have different religions in this country and around the world. In your judgment, do you think that people who are not Christians are going to be condemned?
Thank you for probing on that question. As a Christian, I believe that all individuals are made in the image of God and are worthy of dignity and respect regardless of their religious beliefs. I believe that as a Christian, that's how I should treat all individuals.
And do you think your statement that you put into that publication, they do not know God because they've rejected Jesus Christ the Son and they stand condemned, do you think that's respectful of other religions?
Senator, I wrote a post based on being a Christian and attending a Christian school that has a statement of faith that speaks clearly with regard to the centrality of Jesus Christ in salvation.
I would simply say, Mr. Chairman, that this nominee is really not someone who is what this country is supposed to be about. I will vote no.
Unbelievable clip there. And you wonder how a guy like James, or what was this guy's name again? James T. Hodgkinson gets his views. He gets his views from Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is a bigot. I mean, watch that. And again, that's a heated word. I mean, it's loaded, the word bigot. But he is a bigot. And he showed it here. He was so angry at this guy that he held to the historic Christian view about the Muslim religion. That is that there's only one way to the Father, and that's through Jesus Christ. That's what the Bible teaches. Bernie Sanders knows that probably. That's what the Bible teaches. Yet, for Bernie Sanders and many on the left, if you disagree with Christianity, if you hold to a traditional Christian view, which believes that Muslims who don't, if they don't believe in Christ, they stand condemned. By the way, stand condemned before God and not condemned between us. I mean, I think Bernie was trying to make it a personal thing. No, what he meant, Mr. Vogt, when he was writing this piece, is that Muslims stand condemned before God. That is historic Christianity. That is what the gospel teaches. But Bernie Sanders has no tolerance for these kinds of folks. And he basically implicated that Mr. Vogt was unfit to hold the office that he was applying for in government because he's a Christian and he holds to traditional Christian views. I mean, it's hard to imagine. Now, the true statesman was Mr. Vogt, who was very civil, very winsome in how he answered the questions. And the angry, intolerant person was Bernie Sanders. And you know what? Here's the thing. The left calls for tolerance, but ends up being the most intolerant of all. Bottom line. So, I mean, this is the kind of rhetoric that comes from the left. This is the kind of thing that apparently this man, Mr. Hodgkinson, believes because he volunteered for the Bernie Sanders campaign for president. He thought Bernie should be president. This is a man that he believes should hold the highest office in the world. Someone who believes that Christians who hold to a historic Christian view should be unfit for office. I mean, it's hard to imagine that we've reached this place in America. But that is the rhetoric of the left. Now, what I'd like to do, I give you a couple examples of how individuals or movements are often blamed for the actions of isolated or for what happens in isolation generally. And although this man doesn't appear affiliated to any organization per se, other than the fact that he volunteered for Bernie's campaign, he acted out in isolation. A lot of times we like to blame certain people or entire movements for the actions of others. If you remember several years ago, Kathy Gifford was her name. She was shot in the head at a political outing. I think it was in Colorado, and she was a Democrat. And they immediately rushed to judgment and blamed the Tea Party, even though this person who shot him had no affiliation with the Tea Party at all. In fact, there was no traces of any kind of thing, any kind of affiliations whatsoever regarding this person. But the left automatically blamed conservatives, the Tea Party. They blamed Sarah Palin because Sarah Palin had a map of the United States where she had little targets on congressional districts. And those targets, which we often use in politics, right? We're targeting the such and so district of Ohio. We use that all the time, but yet they tried to claim that she meant it literally, like there was a target on that person. I mean, it is ridiculous. And it's still being used today. In fact, the New York Times mentioned it even today in their article regarding this Steve Scalise shooting. So you got this Kathy Gifford's issue out in Colorado a couple years ago. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was blamed for the violence of Malcolm X, even though Dr. King was a strong believer in the First Amendment, but he also believed in nonviolent, passive resistance. Nonviolent, completely nonviolent, yet he still got blamed for the violence of Malcolm X and his followers. And Dr. King obviously pushed back against that and said that it's not the rhetoric that leads to violence, it's the existence of injustice that's being unresolved peacefully that leads to violence. And he wrote that in the letter from the Birmingham jail. We have examples as regards the pro-life movement as well. Just what was it? I think in 2014, or I don't know, maybe 15, there was a shooting out in Colorado Springs, Colorado, at a Planned Parenthood by a man by the name of Robert Louis Deere, who, after shooting, I guess he was heard saying that there will be no more body parts sold here. And so therefore, the left tried to blame the Center for Medical Progress and David Daleiden for coming out with these videos where Planned Parenthood employees are saying that they're selling body parts. Yet he was tried to implicate the Center for Medical Progress in the shooting at this Planned Parenthood. We've seen this in regards to there was a shooting at the Family Research Council many years ago, where the Southern Poverty Law Center had put out information about them, about the Family Research Council and how they were for traditional marriage. Yet that supposedly led to the shooting there. I mean, on and on again, we see these the dots that people attempt to connect from the speech of others, and the dots connecting to the violence that is perpetrated, and they try to make the case that these were all it's all fits into one gigantic puzzle. Like I said, we need to be responsible with our speech and what we say, but we are, as a free speech advocate, the person that's speaking, unless he's inciting violence directly, is not responsible for the acts of these individuals. One final example, and then we're going to wrap it up. And this was something that happened several years ago in 2012. An individual, his name is James Pollan. I knew James Pollan. I actually volunteered to help out with one of his projects. James Pollan, I think, was involved with the Center for Bioethical Reform on one of our protests. James Pollan is a pro-life advocate, or was. And James Pollan would make it his daily routine very much often to go to high schools and other things, and he would sit there with a pro-life sign in front of the high schools. And in 2002, I don't remember the date, he was shot down. He was gunned down, assassinated, if you will, killed in cold blood, because this offender, this 33-year-old Harlan James Drake, said he was offended by Mr. Pollan's anti-abortion signs. So rather than going up and starting a discussion with Mr. Pollan, he got out of his car and just shot him dead. So this stuff has happened, and it's happening again, and we need to prepare ourselves for what might be coming down the road. We are seeing a disintegration of American culture, no question about it. And here are my takeaways for you, if you're listening today on the program. The things that we need to learn from this situation is, first of all, we don't want to take the low road like the left does and automatically blame the rhetoric for the actions of an individual who might be acting out alone. Period. We need to hold back from doing that, unless there is direct correlation. And if there is, then clearly that person could be implicated in what happened. So we don't want to stoop to their level. We want to rise above it. And it's important that we remain civil in our disagreements with folks. That means that we've got to watch what we say. And I know that I bear, a high burden in that. We call abortion murder, folks. You know that. We don't hesitate to call abortion murder. And a lot of folks on the other side will say, oh, that's crossing the line. You're inciting violence. No, because abortion is murder. It's true, folks. It's absolutely true. So I don't bear any responsibility if someone goes out and does something stupid in an act of violence against an abortionist just because we call abortion murder. The bottom line is, folks, we need to prepare for the worst when it comes to this kind of thing. That means protect yourself, keep yourself safe, be safe, watch what you say. But the bottom line is, don't back down. Speak your minds, believe in the First Amendment, and defend the rights of Americans to speak as they wish. We'll see you next time. God bless you. God bless America. And remember, America,
You've been listening to Mark Harrington, your radio activist. For more information on how to become a witness against the evil plague in America, call Created Equal at 614-269-7808, 614-269-7808, or go online to createdequal.net, createdequal.net. Reporters in the culture war.